So, hi, Jeff. Thank you for agreeing for this interview and giving us the opportunity to bring to light the workings of Point of Pride on the occasion of Pride Month. Since we have so much to talk about, and I'm very excited to hear about how the financial assistance have been given, and considering we also have very less time, we have curated certain questions that would help us make this interview easy to navigate. So, if it's okay, can I ask my first question?
Absolutely, yeah, and the pleasure is all mine. Thanks so much for reaching out with this opportunity.
Thank you. So, my first question is: what does Pride Month mean to you, and why should we be observing it?
Sure. Yeah. So, in the United States, lawmakers all over the country here have introduced a record number of pieces of anti-transgender legislation. In fact, there's more legislation that's been proposed in the last year or so than in the last 10 years combined. And so right now there are 35 states that have either proposed or already passed anti-trans legislation. So for me, this Pride Month, it feels really necessary to carve out a space where we can focus on the joy and the love and the support that we see every day within our own community. So it's a time that we can be really unapologetic, that we can share stories, that we can honor our differences. And so Pride Month for me is a time to celebrate our diversity and our resilience, because these are the qualities that have allowed us to thrive in really difficult times.
So, talking about legislations, if my general knowledge is on point, I've read that Florida has banned talking about anything that's related to LGBTQ plus for children. I'm sorry, I believe it's for children that ages below 5. So, are there any more specific laws that's related, and what's your point on that?
Sure. Yeah, I know there are a number of states that have either proposed bills very similar to Florida. I'm not sure offhand which state, but I know there is at least one state that was interested in extending that law up until like the high school age level. Whether or not that comes to fruition remains to be seen. But I think that from my perspective, even just the fact that the Florida bill did pass and that this legislation is being proposed, it has such a detrimental effect on LGBT youth, because they're seeing their very like existence, the thing that allows them to understand who they are and navigate the world as themselves, sort of being erased or hidden from the classroom. And so I think that ultimately it's more than just a shame and a disservice to our youth. It's important to celebrate history and talk about these issues because, we're here and we exist.
I believe that is something that should be done. And so, if these legislations are passed, are there any kind of protest from the general public, and how have they been responding to it?
Yeah. So I think that the political climate here is pretty split. I mean, from my perspective as an activist, and a board member of a nonprofit organization specifically serving the trans community, I see so many LGBTQ plus folks and our allies really coming out in support against these bills. So there's protests across the nation. There's calling our government officials and trying to just make sure that these bills do not move forward because we know the harm that they can cause. So not just the Florida bill that you mentioned that sort of blocks your ability to talk about queer topics in the classroom. There's a lot of bills right now that limit transgender people's ability to participate in sports, to access gender-affirming healthcare, to just use restrooms that correlate with their gender identity. All of these things push trans folks out of public space and make it really difficult for us to just live our lives. And so we are seeing, definitely among the community and allies, a very loud fight against these things. And that's been really, really heartening to see.
Even the basic human rights can get violated, and that's really terrible to find out. So how has Point of Pride been a part, been a companion in this journey?
Sure. Yeah. So, trans youth, especially, but trans youth and adults face unique challenges and discrimination in being able to afford or access their healthcare needs. And so, what Point of Pride does is we provide direct financial assistance to trans folks who can't otherwise obtain necessary healthcare. So, to date, we've actually awarded over $500,000 in financial aid to recipients that then use that for gender affirming surgery, permanent hair removal services, or access to hormone replacement therapy. These procedures all empower trans folks to be able to live their lives more safely and authentically. And our organization has also donated over 13,000 chest binders and femme shapewear garments to trans youth and adults in all 50 states and around the world. We've actually served people in 90 countries and counting. And so these items help empower folks too, in much the same way that they're able to show up, whether it's in the classroom or in the workplace or anywhere, and just feel more comfortable, live their lives more safely and authentically.
Even when I saw that on the website, I was elated, and same is my feelings when I'm listening to you. So what has been their response? I'd just like to know like a couple of positive stories from such experience.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. Two things immediately come to mind. So with those garments that I had mentioned, every time we mail out a garment, we always include a handwritten note of support. And so we have volunteers or we have folks, in the community. We actually just participated in a big Pride march and festival in Delaware this past weekend. And so we had a lot of folks that were there at the event write these cards, which is just lovely. So like I said, they go to every recipient that receives a garment, and we often hear all the time that the impact of the letter is almost as meaningful to them as the chest binder or the femme shapewear garment itself, just because they feel so seen and important and valued. We get feedback all the time, especially from youth, that like they read the note and it just made them cry, like just happy tears. So happy tears is definitely the first thing that comes to mind. And the other thing is that, especially for folks that wear a chest binder, which for people that might be watching this that don't know, it's a garment that helps compress your chest to flatten it and create a more masculine or neutral appearance, which is really important for a lot of trans folks that might not want or might not be able to access any sort of like chest surgery. And so the other piece of feedback we always hear is that once folks start wearing their binders and they feel just more comfortable about their physical appearance and everything, feels more in line with how they view themselves, they start hugging people again. It's very common that a lot of trans youth, especially, don't want to hug people. They sort of retreat, they hunch up. And so just access to a binder allows them to feel that sense of closeness again and feel more comfortable to actually embrace somebody. And it's just such a small gesture that again just has such a tremendous impact on them. So I always get really happy and sometimes tear up when I hear stories from folks that just say, yeah, I was able to give my best friend a hug and it felt so great.
I literally had goosebumps when you mentioned the hugging part. We did start on a sadder note, talking about legislation, but I believe we have come to a much better point in the interview where we're talking about the positives and what we can do. So yes, talking about the positive part. So there's no doubt in saying that your organization, Point of Pride, has been doing a lot. And if somebody from the outside, if they want to help, how can they help?
Sure. Yeah, I think a really great way folks can help is what I had just mentioned, is through writing letters. So on our website, under the Get Involved tab, we have a page that's Write Letters to Trans Folks, and that gives the full details of everything I talked about. But we have folks from all over the world that will write a single letter, write a whole stack of letters, and mail it to us, and then we'll rehome those notes to trans youth and adults that need that support. So it's a really nice personal way that you can have a large impact just through time, effort, and creativity. And of course, every nonprofit organization will also say a great way that you can support is through monetary donations. I will mention that Point of Pride is completely volunteer operated, and more than 95 cents of every dollar goes straight into these programs and services. So if folks would like to make a gift, we often say that as little as $3 has a big impact, because $3 is the amount of money it costs to process and ship out a binder mailing.
That's amazing. Perfect anonymous letters is something that everybody loves, but I believe over here it holds a more special meaning, and it really boosts their morale, I guess, and makes them feel special, just like you mentioned. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah, so if you had to recommend a few steps for increasing the recognition of the LGBTQ plus community, what would they be?
Sure. Yeah, so I think recognition of our community first begins with acknowledgement. So I think I would recommend thinking about all the different ways that LGBTQ plus folks show up in all facets of society. So whether that's in healthcare or in schools or in the workforce, and thinking about what those intersections of LGBTQ plus identities look like. So whether we're talking about youth or elders or folks that might be living with disabilities or chronic illnesses, people that are living in areas of the world that might be hostile to their very existence. And so just acknowledging that our community exists everywhere in all of these areas of greater society is, I think, the first step. And from there, being able to look at the unique challenges and lived experiences, right? Like we said, it's not all negative. There's like some really positive experiences that we can understand from the beauty, the diversity, and the resilience of our community. And then I think from there, I would recommend like learning more about the history. So doing your own research, learning about the queer ancestors or trailblazers that have shaped our history today and our movement today. So, in the United States alone, names that come to mind for me are Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and many other activists who have really paved the way for our modern day community and movement.
You mentioned a point, diversity. So till now, we have only seen cultural diversity. We have seen all sorts of diversity, but thinking about sexual diversity, I do not think that has ever come to anybody's mind. So how? So given the fact that diversity has been considered such an important factor of a society, so how important it is to include sexual diversity as well in that definition, and how will it impact the society in general?
Yeah, I think it's critical, just like when we talk about race or age or disability status as these protected classes, we can certainly see why very easily, right? Why that those things might need to be protected to prevent against discrimination or against just hardship in living your lives. And so when we think about like gender and sexual minorities, you can make that same jump very easily. If I'm on a health insurance plan, maybe with my family, and I'm trans and I need a particular, procedure covered and my insurance denies it, well, that causes a major problem. Are we talking about not being able to utilize insurance or looking for different plans? So often in the United States, health insurance is tied to your employment situation. Statistically, it's very hard for LGBTQ plus folks, it's harder than the general public to be able to get a job. It's especially difficult for trans folks who might be facing that discrimination. And in a lot of states here, there's no legal protections if you're fired on the basis of your gender identity or your sexual orientation. So again, if you lose your job because of your queer status, you might lose your health insurance with it. You lose your livelihood, your ability to access housing. It's also tied together and so intersectional that it's very difficult to talk about one thing without the other. And for people of color who are also LGBTQ, those challenges just get amplified. For folks that have a disability and might already be facing issues when accessing healthcare, now their gender or sexual minority status might add another layer of difficulty or barriers. So yes, I'd say it's vital that when thinking about all of these different identities, that LGBTQ plus status is right up there with all of these other protected classes.
That legit sounded very scary, and I never looked at it in this perspective where you could also lose your livelihood, and that can be dangerous for living a normal life, and that is actually scary. So and that really explains why we need so much of movement and why we need so much of noises, not just from the specific group of people who are going through it, but also from the masses, so that the ones who are sitting up there making the policies, they can actually understand the impact of what's been done by them. So I am pretty sure we are in a much better place than we were say like 10 years back. So what has the trajectory been, and what has been your visibility over that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that you're right in that in the last 10 years, so much good has come out. In the United States, we've seen the passage of marriage equality. We've seen more and more of the general public here just really support not just gay marriage, but other rights and legal protections for the larger LGBTQ plus community. I think, especially among the younger generations, it's much more common to know someone personally who's a member of the community. And I think knowing people, having loved ones, or even just acquaintances helps normalize and understand a lot of the issues and topics that we're talking about today, and a lot of the things that we talk about during Pride and all year long. I do think as it relates to the trans community, we've also seen lots of visibility there. So folks like Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine, and just increasingly, Elliot Page, for example, very big name actor here in the United States, being so public about his story and his transition. I think that these stories really help with that visibility and help with that upward trajectory that we're seeing. It is a unique circumstance in the United States in this moment, just because of all of the proposed, anti-trans legislation and pushback that we're seeing, particularly from folks that are more, on the right end of our political spectrum. But I do think among the general public, there is still this sense of, let's just let LGBTQ folks live their lives. Let's support them. Let's learn more. Let's affirm them. I think that the general public has really come a long way, and it's really great to see.
Absolutely correct. And as long as the masses power is there, we have all the power. This is what I believe, and I have also personally seen the shift in the way they perceive new concepts, including the Pride movement, and that is like a ray of hope that things will get even better in the future. So with this question, I believe this would be the last question of the interview. If there's some myths that you would like to break around the LGBTQ plus community.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, two myths come to mind. So the first is that, and again, this might be specific to the United States, it might be broader internationally. So I am curious if you've heard of either of these. But the first myth is that there's a gay or a trans agenda. It's often accompanied with suggestions or even accusations that LGBTQ plus folks are trying to turn other people, especially youth, into members of the community. But this is just simply false. There's no agenda for trans folks other than to live our lives as our authentic selves and to be free from discrimination and oppression and so often violence. The other myth that I've seen floating around a lot in recent years is that many folks ultimately detransition. So that means if a trans person transitions either socially or medically, then decides to revert back to the sex that they were assigned at birth. In reality, most people who transition, whether they do so socially or medically or both, do not regret their decision. In fact, less than 1% of trans people report any sort of transition-related regret. And for those that ultimately do decide to detransition, it's very commonly a temporary thing, and it's oftentimes because they lack support, whether that's in their home, their school, their workplace, or because they run into financial or healthcare considerations. So, through our work, we've talked with people that have detransitioned technically because they could no longer afford access to their medications. Oftentimes because they lost their source of income or employment. And so they did not do so out of any sense of regret, or that they had made the wrong decision, or that they were, pressured at some point from medical providers. At the opportunity that they were able to get back on their medications, they did. And so, I just, I wanted to take this moment when I saw this question. I really appreciated it because I wanted to stress that for the overwhelming majority of trans folks, choosing to transition, whether socially or medically or both, is the right decision, with benefits that really outweigh any risks.
My God, the maximum that I've heard is people talking about LGBTQ plus community as if it's a disease, something that can be cured through various means. But thinking about it as an agenda is the wildest thing that I can ever imagine.
And we see that terminology quite often, unfortunately, and so I'm here to tell you there's no agenda, there's no secret meetings or anything like that.
So shedding light on such an important topic and through such a diverse and a very different lens. So now we have two small rituals. The first one is where we say where we are from, and first we say our name, where we are from, and then what we do. So if somebody asks me, I'd say that good evening everyone. This is Amrisha Saurasya and I am from India. And I work in Goodera as a non-profit, in the non-profit marketing team. So now it's your turn.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Main. My pronouns are he, him. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the United States. And I am the co-founder and board secretary of Point of Pride.
Perfect. And now the second ritual that we do is we do a hand gesture that represents Point of Pride or something that's very close to you, and we'll hold that for like 2 seconds so that people at the back end can take a screenshot. So it's your call. What kind of gesture would you like to do?
What sort of gestures have you done in the past? Give me some examples.
No, I won't reveal it. Then you might copy that. So
okay.
First your call, then I'll suggest mine.
So I think sometimes on our board meetings or when we're doing virtual calls with a group, we'll sometimes do like this, like applause. I don't know if that is what you're looking for. We could do that, or we could just do like.
Also, I know this is an applause from the deaf community. This is how they applaud. And okay, so since this won't be understood and even my hands are not visible through a screenshot, we can do a small heart. So this is something that we've been doing, like a heart or like support or
I like this. Yeah, you want to do this?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we'll hold this for 2 seconds. Perfect. So thank you so much, Jeff. And if you have any questions or any doubts, any queries, you are free to ask them.
Sure. This was excellent. It was so nice to meet you and make time for this conversation. I'm really looking forward to seeing what your team puts together. And I'll just share with you the relationship with Goodera has been really positive on our end. We really appreciate the work that you've done for us in connecting volunteers to our cause. And just can't understate how appreciative we are of partnering with y'all. So thank you.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is all ours. And have a great day ahead.